Welcome to NewsNation's Backscroll, where we look back at our major news coverage on the most important topics and personalities of our time.
We want to get straight to breaking news coming down in just the last 5 minutes. The U.S. reportedly striking Iran directly. We want to go straight to NewsNation's Libby Dean, live at the White House. Libby, what are we learning?
President Trump announced this on social media moments ago, Natasha, saying that the U.S. has joined Israel on its fight against Iran, striking nuclear facilities, 3 nuclear sites within Iran. I want to read the statement in full for our viewers from the president. He says, "We have completed our very successful attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside of Iran airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. We were tracking this throughout the day, Natasha, those B-2 bombers that were headed there." And he is now saying they have attacked Fordow. This post goes on to read, "Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter." Throughout the day, we were tracking if the president would get involved. He set, of course, this 2-week deadline of if they were or were not going to get involved, the U.S., of course. And now we're seeing he made this decision ultimately within 3 days for the U.S. to get involved in this conflict with Iran. Now, of course, we watch to see how Iran responds to this, how they will retaliate. A lot of questions remaining in the air right now. If the president was in communication with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ahead of these strikes. And right before I came on to speak with you and we were monitoring this situation, Natasha, I saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio outside of the West Wing working the phones. And then moments right after I saw him hang up the phone, President Trump posted this on social media, and we know that he's still in the Oval Office meeting with his national security team. But this is a defining moment for President Trump and his presidency as he now announces that the U.S. has joined Israel in its fight against Iran, Natasha.
Yeah, and we are continuing to cover this breaking news. Is these 3 nuclear sites in Iran that were the target of these attacks? Does it seem from preliminary information that Fordow, though, was the primary target here? President Trump describing a full payload of bombs. What are we learning about that?
Yeah, you saw that, Natasha, in the end of that post there, specifically talking about Fordow and how a full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. And throughout the week, this was something we were tracking. Fordow, this site that President Trump acknowledged the Israeli arsenal did not have the strength to go all the way underground and fully destabilize this site in Fordow. And moving forward, of course, this was something that the U.S. was very adamant on, that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And Fordow was, of course, a primary site of them building this nuclear weapon in Iran. We're, of course, going to continue and watch what the developments are out of Iran tonight as we monitor the president still in the Oval Office with his national security team, likely going to be a late night here at the White House, Natasha.
Yeah, certainly. And it seems that that primary facility where Iran was conducting uranium enrichment, any confirmation so far on if those attacks were successful in actually penetrating deep enough into that entire tunnel system, that deep bunker where the uranium enrichment was taking place?
I've been monitoring the White House here, Natasha, and haven't been able to monitor what's going on the ground in Iran just yet. But of course, that was the goal of this strike by the U.S. on Fordow, was to destabilize and stop them from building any uranium enrichment there. So likely that's what the U.S. is hoping for. And you said you heard President Trump there say, congratulating the American warriors in this and saying now is the time for peace. So we'll see moving forward what it looks like on the ground outside of Fordow's nuclear development center there in Iran.
Libby Dean, I really appreciate that. And I know you'll continue to monitor the latest out of the White House. We'll check back with you.
Live with breaking news coverage on NewsNation. An extraordinary evening and morning in the Middle East. The Israelis have taken on the Iranian nuclear program with a massive long-range strike campaign. It started with taking out the Iranian command and control facilities. In addition to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard commander, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is reportedly dead. The head of Iran's military, their chief of staff, was reportedly killed in targeted strikes. as was much of the Iranian top nuclear scientist regime, were taken out. That team was taken out. Then the Israelis turned their forces and their airstrikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities. The timing of this is crucial. The Israeli prime minister went on air just a couple of hours ago saying that there was an inflection point. The Israelis now reporting that the Iranians were within days of being able to produce a nuclear bomb, and they took action. The United States, President Trump, says that they were made aware of the Israelis' intentions to strike, but no U.S. forces were involved. We should asterisk that with yet. If there is an Iranian response to these attacks into Israel or to U.S. bases in the Middle East, that will change things drastically. It is impossible to understate the significance of this. There has been discussion of an Israeli attack on Iran's nuclear facilities for at least the past 15 years, if not longer. And tonight they struck and say they will continue this long-range bombing campaign from Israel into Iran until Iran's nuclear program is forever dismantled. And the longer the Israelis are able to continue to bomb, the more they will take apart the Iranian military might and their ability to respond. Timing of this incredibly significant. It was just a couple of days ago that President Trump said he did not believe an Israeli strike was imminent. He said that it could happen, and it did happen as President Trump was hosting a picnic for senators and members of Congress at the White House. All right, here is what a couple of American B-2s and bunker buster bombs will do. Satellite images of craters right on the sites of the two main Iranian nuclear sites. These were the targets of surprise U.S. airstrikes now a little more than 24 hours ago. What we do not know, and what the satellite images do not show, is the damage underground. We don't know what has happened to the Iranian centrifuges, their laboratories, their enriched uranium that they so carefully hid and protected with 300 feet of reinforced concrete. And we are at one of the most consequential times in world history. If you think about inflection moments since perhaps the Cuban Missile Crisis, this is one of those inflection moments. Not only for the world, but for American troops and for all of us here at home. Thanks for joining us. Special edition of News Nation tonight, live from the nation's capital. I'm Leland Vittert. The world is bracing right now for Iran's response. 24 hours after those bombs dropped on President Trump's orders, and as the Israeli mission to destroy Iran's nuclear program continues, the ball in this war, this exchange, is in Iran's court. And their next move will shape the future of the Middle East as we know it. The President of the United States has said any attack on American military facilities or American service members or Americans will be met with overwhelming force. And military bases in all of the Middle East, and obviously the U.S. Navy ships in the Persian Gulf, the Gulf of Aden, the Mediterranean, are on the highest level of readiness they can be. There's also the threat here at home, growing concerns of retaliation from sleeper cells in our own backyard. And all eyes right now are on 21 miles of water that separates American allies from Iran. That is known as the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most vital oil checkpoints in the world. The Iranian parliament has said they will close the Strait of Hormuz. It would change the world economy overnight. 25% of the world's oil moves through the Strait of Hormuz. Gas prices could go up by $1 or $2 overnight. We are also monitoring the skies over Israel. In our program last night, there were multiple salvos of Iranian ballistic missiles. We'll see if those come tonight in Israel. They came just as dawn broke in Israel. Tel Aviv is a ghost town right now, as Israelis are still told to stay home, not go to work, not congregate in big groups, and remain close to their bomb shelters. Also tonight, big questions about how much President Trump is willing to actually get involved in Iran. President Trump tonight on Truth Social wrote, "It is not politically correct to use the term regime change, But if the current Iranian regime is unable to make Iran great again, why wouldn't there be a regime change, MIGA, as opposed to MAGA? A very different tone from what we heard from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth earlier today.
This mission was not and has not been about regime change. The president authorized a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program and the collective self-defense of our troops and our ally Israel.
And we have seen over the past week or so the administration pretty deftly play good cop, bad cop with the Iranians. How much of that was going on, we don't know. Enormous parts of this story tonight, and there are many. The panel with us all night. Joining us now, Brigadier General John Teichert, Rebecca Grant, National Security Analyst, Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Jim Hansen, Chief Editor of the Middle East Forum and former U.S. Army Special Forces. Nice to see all of you. Thank you. General, I want to start with you because in addition to being F-22 pilot, F-15 pilot, commander of Andrews Air Force Base, you were the senior defense official in Iraq a couple of years ago, and reporting now, as it is overnight in Iraq, that the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq are starting to make moves on U.S. bases. What do those attacks look like? What are the options right now for the U.S. military?
Leland, there's about 2,500 American troops currently in Iraq, 3 primary locations, Al-Assad Air Base, Erbil in the north, and in Baghdad. Right now, the Iraqi Counterterrorism Service, a very westernized military component of the Iraqi government, is poised such that they are trying to defend to make sure those Iranian proxy groups do not do anything against the sovereignty of Iraq and against American forces there.
Okay, forgive me for not feeling overwhelming calmness with the Iraqi counterterrorism forces. What are the options for the Americans who are there?
In addition to those CTS forces, those 3 locations are currently defensively postured so that they can counter rockets, so that they can counter drones, and so that they can protect the sanctity and the sovereignty of those bases around the perimeter.
Okay, so we have a couple of maps there, and that also includes, obviously, there's U.S. forces also in Syria where the Iranians have a lot of forces still there. If you were to look at this, is this the most obvious place the Iranians can respond?
If you're going with a proxy attack, then the answer is yes, in Iraq specifically, because of the number of troops, American troops, and the array of Iranian-aligned militias. But I think also we must consider the ballistic missile threat from Iran that could attack a variety of military installations in the region, but also diplomatic facilities and economic interests of the United States.
Joel, you've obviously studied the Iranians for a long time. You were part of the original Iran deal. You were a big proponent of it. I think you have now changed your viewpoint over the past few years of how to look at Iran. But it is noteworthy, for all of their bluster, they really have not done much in the past 24 hours. And I am wondering if that is because what we talked about last night, which is the overwhelming amount of U.S. military power that is poised around them, and that the U.S. military has been very public about bringing in.
Well, you know, Leland, this strike last night did not occur in a vacuum. There has been a long lead into this, the Israeli strikes over the past week and a half or so. But even prior to that, during the Biden administration, multiple strikes back and forth, Israel hitting sites, hitting defensive systems, knocking them out inside of Iran. And so their response opportunities are very limited and constrained. In addition to their defensive capabilities being knocked out, Hezbollah has been wiped out in terms of its ability to hit Israel, Hamas in Gaza, the list goes on and on. Even with the Arab states, they've had a warming of relations with Saudi, with the Gulf states and others. So striking those countries who have said they don't want to have anything to do with the attack from last night is not a viable option either. So they're very limited in where they can go.
Rebecca, something interesting happened is quietly and with the amount of operational security as the B-2 attacks were done under, which was extraordinary. We're going to get into just sort of how remarkable what happened over the past 24 hours is. We heard from the Secretary of Defense and the chairman earlier today about it. But for as quietly as that is done, the U.S. has been very overt about how much it has moved into the Middle East. Carrier air wings, fighter air wings, submarines that they used to launch Tomahawks, a huge amount of naval assets. What do we make of the overt nature of telegraphing to the Iranians what we have?
Well, there are 2 points there. And one is to contain Iran, and the other is to really amplify the force protection for our forces, which range from Syria all the way through. I'm really struck at the deployment of the aircraft carriers. You know, that's 5,000 sailors on each carrier. We now have 2 coming into the area, and they have been flying combat air patrols. They're ready to knock down drones. Don't forget what's always been there, too, U.S. Space Force. They see every flare of an Iranian missile launch. And our U.S. Navy's already taken down a couple nose-on shots against Iranian missiles. So this is saying to the Ayatollah, don't mess with us. And it's also a message off to Russia, to China, to everybody else as well.
Trump said today he's seen new intelligence that the sites were obliterated. Now, I think this was a mistake for him to say if he can't prove it. But here's what he said.
The document said it could be very severe damage, but they didn't take that. They said it could be limited or it could be very severe because it was very early after. Since then, we've collected additional intelligence. We've also spoken to people who have seen the site, and the site is obliterated. And we think everything nuclear is down there. They didn't take it out. Look, we're going to talk to them next week with Iran. We may sign an agreement. I don't know. To me, I don't think it's that necessary. I mean, they had a war, they fought. Now they're going back to their world. I don't care if I have an agreement or not.
Well, but he does have to care that they don't try to restart the program. I mean, that's the whole point, right? So, because there is this push to say that Trump screwed it up, now you're going to see something that you don't usually take. Because if he's going to do one thing heavy and hard, it's defend himself. So the CIA releases a statement. They cite what they claim is a historically accurate source and method that confirms key Iranian nuclear facilities have been destroyed and would take years to rebuild. So what does that mean, and is that enough? I want to bring in somebody who knows. Former director of the CIA, former commander of the military's U.S. Central Command, General David Petraeus. It's good to see you, General. It's been a second.
Good to be back, Chris.
You know, you are politically savvy as well. What do you make of this insistence that the bombings failed? And what do you look at for proof?
Well, frankly, I haven't seen people say the bombings fail. It's really a debate over how much damage was done. The DIA report apparently that was leaked was actually low confidence in what they actually said, so it should not have been given all that credence to begin with. I tend to think that the CIA statement, it aligns, frankly, with my own estimation, which is that severe damage was done to the program. And I think that's about where it should stay until you have the complete battle damage assessment done. And that takes time. There's no set limit for it. You could have a breakthrough. The CIA may have had access to something that enables them to make that statement with high confidence, which is what you really want to see. There are reports that the Israelis actually had some monitors and so forth. That may be the case as well. But you can't help but look at the photographs and realize that you have these punched holes in the mountainside. That's good, actually. That means that it did what it's supposed to, which is to go down into the mountain over time, hundreds of feet. Each one of those culminates its descent with explosion of 5,000 pounds of explosive. You do 12 of those, and it will have done enormous damage to any centrifuges that are in there. Just the sheer blast damage will be significant to these very sensitive instruments. And then if there is the highly enriched uranium in there, as was the case, I believe there were trucks outside there. Maybe some have moved on, and these are questions that do need to be answered. But I think it's important to be a bit measured at this moment in time and just say we can clearly see that there was very substantial damage done to really all of the nuclear facilities, but especially the three that we followed up the Israeli damage with our submarine-launched cruise missiles and then these massive ordnance penetrators. And then we'll see. Bigger question is, was there any high-enriched uranium that was stored elsewhere or was taken out for these strikes? And are there centrifuges that are elsewhere as well? Certainly some were in the manufacturing process that may have been stored somewhere else, this kind of thing. That's what we need to determine. And when that's determined, either I think Iran will have to agree to dismantle its entire nuclear program, and I'd like to see that kind of agreement and to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to go anywhere they want at any time they want to oversee the process and to verify and validate it, or Israel will bomb it again. And I think those that say, well, they only set it back a few years, if that's the case, in a few years, Israel will bomb again. I think people do not appreciate how significant 10-7 was for the Israelis in their strategic context. They will no longer allow a threat to be built on their borders or even in the region, the way they did tolerate that in the past with Hezbollah in Lebanon, with Hamas in Gaza, with other proxies elsewhere, and then especially with Iran at home. And I think that's the new reality of the Israeli defense strategy. And I'm quite confident that if, again, material is discovered elsewhere, and one would think, given the intelligent penetration that Mossad demonstrated in the early days of this operation in particular, which is so extraordinary, 12 days and not even a single plane shot down, much less a maintenance problem reported that forced a pilot to bail out. It's really quite extraordinary. Well, and our operation of 125 aircraft was very, very impressive as well.
I mean, obviously, you also have the collateral damage, and that's a very impersonal way to put it. You know, they didn't just kill the specific targets. There are a lot of citizens that were hurt as well. And I think that the most sympathetic actor in the entire equation are the people of Iran that are held hostage by that regime. I wanted to ask you one question that's kind of pseudo-political. There is a narrative now, a way of thinking, let's say, in America, that we don't get anything from the alliance with Israel, that they get everything. They get the Iron Dome. They get all of this leverage because they have the big gorilla of the United States standing behind them, but that all the money and all the support doesn't really benefit the United States and that it should change. What is your response to that notion?
Well, look at what they have done to Lebanese Hezbollah, which prevented any progress in Lebanon for a very long period of time. And that's very advantageous for the region in many, many ways. And of course, that region, what really matters, as always, even though we are now net exporters of crude oil and huge exporters of liquid natural gas, is the flow of oil and gas out to the countries that it actually fuels the global economy. They've dramatically reduced Iran's threat to the region. All of the countries were subject to various challenges from Iran over the years or from their proxies. Hamas, that job's not done by any means, but dramatically degraded, and they're not going to be able to be helped by Iran now. And then some of the other proxies that they have as well. These have been murderous. During the surge in Iraq alone, hundreds of our soldiers were killed by the explosively formed penetrators provided to the Shia militia in Iraq by Iran. So seeing Iran cut down in this way in their capabilities, I think, is very, very positive for a region that is very important to the world. Beyond that, there's the moral obligation, I think, that we should take and do take very seriously about a country that we helped bring into existence and repeatedly have come to the rescue of at various times when that was needed, the October 73 war in particular, but others as well. And again, we get a great deal in return when it comes to intelligence sharing, especially partnership in a variety of respects in that world. And then also our defense alliance is very important as well, a defense partnership.
General Petraeus, I appreciate your perspective as always. Thank you for being part of the conversation here on NewsNation.
Good to be with you, Chris. Thanks.
All right, I'll see you again, General.
Correspondent Brian Inton is on the ground for us in Doha, Qatar. Brian, quite a different scene there than what we saw there yesterday.
Yeah, Nicole, what a difference a day makes. When I was on with you yesterday and we saw the missiles flying right over my shoulder behind me over downtown Doha, now much calmer scene. Things have sort of leveled out here. Behind the scenes, we've learned that Qatar was actually working on this ceasefire deal with Iran, which is interesting when you think about just what happened yesterday. They were calling out Iran saying, hey, wait a minute, you can't be firing these missiles right over our territory. They had to close down their airspace. We'll come to find out they were working behind the scenes on a ceasefire, trying to calm all of this down. The relationships here are complicated, obviously, in the region, especially when it comes to Qatar. Qatar is obviously a friend of the United States. You've got the biggest U.S. military base in the Middle East that's here in Qatar. But at the same time, their relationship with Iran has been on the up and up, which is one of the reasons that it's opened the door here for them to sort of be the head of these negotiations and to help broker a deal. And now it has all come out that they actually are the ones here in Qatar who brokered the deal, the ceasefire deal. And the hope here on the ground is obviously that it is going to stick. Nicole?
Brian, what have we learned about these meetings between Iran and Qatar?
Yeah, so we know that they've been going on for quite some time. There's been this talk back and forth, which again makes sense when you think about yesterday, the fact that there was a warning here in Qatar that they told them to close down the airspace and that this would be happening. This is because the negotiations were already ongoing. I want to show you this picture. This is a picture that the Qatari government put out on social media today that's interesting. It's Qatar's Minister of Foreign Affairs who summoned, that's the way they described it, summoned the ambassador of Iran for a meeting today and put the picture out saying that they were condemning again the fact that that Iran launched these missiles into their airspace, but also trying to send a message, obviously, to the world with the picture that the dialogue is open, that the conversation continues, and trying to send a message that they are helping to try to keep the ceasefire in place, Nicole.
All right, Brian Entin in Doha, Qatar, thank you.
All right, with us now, Elliot Ackerman, decorated Marine officer, formerly with the CIA, as well as best-selling author. His new book, Sheepdogs, it's awesome, trust me, is out now. Danielle Pletka, American Enterprise Institute Senior Fellow, focuses on U.S. foreign policy, the Middle East, and terrorism. Danielle, I want to start with you. When we look at this one report that focuses just on satellite images coming from right after the bombings at some of Iran's nuclear sites, it feels as though it is quite narrow, and my friends at other networks are extrapolating an awful lot from it to try and make Donald Trump look bad. Is that fair?
I think that's the underlying motivation here. Look, you know, those of us who have paid a lot of attention to Iran over the years know that the visibility that our intelligence community has had into the Iranian nuclear weapons program has been, let's just say politely, somewhat limited. So the idea that 3 days later, they know that having dropped 1/3 of 1,000,000 tons of explosives on these areas, they know it didn't work. It doesn't ring true to me.
Fair enough. The follow-on to that is, I don't think the Israelis, who have much better visibility into this, as evidenced by the first 9 days of this war and what they were able to pull off, they wouldn't have allowed this to stop if they thought Iran was just a couple of months away from a nuclear weapon.
No, that's absolutely true. Look, the Israelis have gone in because they felt that the Iranians had turned a critical corner, both on their missile program and on their nuclear weapons development. So the idea that suddenly Israel would back off and accept a ceasefire with the mission far from accomplished, which is what these leaks suggest, seems not credible.
All right, fair enough. I agree with both with the analysis. Elliot, there is something here that I think is important because, yes, exactly how many centrifuges were damaged, destroyed, on and on is important, but also I think what Israel did to the Iranians in terms of penetrating them and sowing discord and division inside of the Iranian military is important. I want to play this. This was audio from right before the ceasefire. It was the Israeli intelligence services calling Iranian generals and saying, we already killed a number of your commanders, those higher ranked generals, you're next. Take a listen.
من از کشوری زنگ میزنم که 2 ساعت پیش باقری سلامی شمخانی رو دونه دونه فرستاد جهنم. الان تنها پیشنهادی هم که به تو میکنم، هم میتونم بهت پیشنهاد کنم 12 ساعت وقت داری که پاتو بگیری با زن و بچت فرار کنی.
You have 12 hours to escape. Elliot, are we focusing too much on the B-2s and Fordo versus what the Israelis were able to do in taking Iran apart?
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, I agree with everything that Danielle said, and that the Israelis acted because they felt there was an imminent threat, as to the administration. But I think also there was a unique opportunity in that Iran has just been significantly weakened since October 7th, as well as its proxies. And so the window to do this was right now. And I think, you know, the administration and the Israelis wanted to take that opportunity before Iran could reconstitute itself.
You write spy novels. Is there things that the Israelis did that you had never thought possible?
Well, I think if you're in the espionage business, it's a business of always trying to make the impossible possible. But there's certainly, you know, some operations they've run that have been incredibly creative. I mean, first and foremost, the pager operation that decapitated Hezbollah, and the Iranians obviously saw that and know that the the Israeli penetrations into Iran run very, very deep.
Yeah, and that's probably important to keep them guessing. Danielle, recently ICE just announced that they arrested 11 Iranian nationals, including a former Iranian army sniper and a Hezbollah-linked terrorist. What is Iran's desire at this point? They said, yes, we agreed to a ceasefire. They kind of cried mercy. You study them. Does that mean they're backing down on trying to exact some revenge for being humiliated?
Not a chance. Look, ever since 1979, when this regime came to power, and one of their first actions was to take the U.S. Embassy and all of its residents, our diplomats, hostage and hold them for 444 days, they have been killing Americans. Until 9/11, they had killed more Americans in the modern era than anybody else, and they're still trying. They tried to kill the President of the United States. They're trying to kill the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of State, the former Iran negotiator. They tried to kill the Saudi ambassador in a restaurant in Georgetown a few years ago. These are people who use terrorists and their own direct proxies and criminal gangs. So the idea that they wouldn't have fed people across the border during 4 years of open borders is laughable.